North Africa, May 1943. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a canvas of sand and death painted in scorching yellows and browns. Klaus Becker knelt in the dust, hands raised, watching American soldiers approach through waves of heat. He expected a bullet. Instead, one soldier tossed something small and dark into his lap. Klaus stared at the brown wrapper stamped with English words he couldn't read. The soldier gestured toward his mouth. Klaus unwrapped it slowly, placed the square on his tongue, and tasted something impossible, something that would shatter everything he believed about his enemy. The Afrika Korps had been retreating for 3 days. Klaus Becker was 19 years old, hollow-cheeked from dysentery, his uniform crusted with sand and sweat that never dried. Around him, what remained of his unit stumbled through the wasteland, their boots worn through, their canteens empty. The panzer divisions had scattered like ants under a boot. Radio silence. No supply lines. No hope. When the American tanks appeared on the horizon that morning, Klaus felt something inside him collapse. Not fear exactly. Relief, maybe. Or just exhaustion so complete it felt like surrender before the actual moment arrived. They came fast, Shermans kicking up dust clouds that blotted out the sun, infantry following in half tracks, their faces obscured by goggles and scarves. Klaus dropped his rifle in the sand. Around him, 30 other German soldiers did the same. They raised their hands slowly, mechanically, like men in a dream. The Americans surrounded them with guns raised, shouting commands Klaus barely understood. But there was something in their voices. Not the savage fury he'd been promised, not the cruelty propaganda films had shown in Berlin's theaters. Just efficiency, tiredness, men doing a job. One soldier approached Klaus directly. Young, probably Klaus's age, with dirt-streaked cheeks and eyes that looked decades older than his face. He gestured for Klaus to stand, patted him down for weapons, found none. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. He tossed it to Klaus. Klaus caught it instinctively, turned it over in his trembling hands. English words stamped across the wrapper. Hershey's Chocolate Ration D Bar. The soldier pointed to his own mouth, made an eating gesture, then turned away to process the next prisoner. Klaus stared at the package. In 2 years of war, he'd eaten sawdust bread, potato water soup, sometimes nothing. Once in Poland, he'd watched men fight over a dead dog. Chocolate was a memory from childhood, distant as peacetime itself. The Wehrmacht hadn't issued chocolate since 1941. Even the officers rarely saw it. He unwrapped the bar slowly. Inside, dark brown squares pressed into a mold, slightly melted at the edges from desert heat. The smell hit him first. Rich, sweet, impossibly foreign after months of burnt powder and blood. Klaus broke off a corner, hesitated, then placed it on his tongue. The taste exploded across his senses. It wasn't just sweetness, though, that alone would have been enough. There was depth to it, complexity, a richness that seemed impossible given the circumstances. Klaus closed his eyes. For 5 seconds, he wasn't in North Africa. He wasn't a prisoner. He was 7 years old in his mother's kitchen in Stuttgart, watching her melt chocolate for his birthday cake, the steam rising, the whole house smelling like celebration. When he opened his eyes, tears had carved clean lines down his dust-covered cheeks. Later, in the POW processing area, Klaus would learn that other Germans had received the same gift. Dozens of chocolate bars distributed like handshakes, casual as breathing. American soldiers seemed to have infinite supplies of them, tossing extras to prisoners who looked especially hungry or young. Hans Müller, a machine gunner from Dresden, held his bar like something sacred. He ate it slowly, one tiny piece at a time, trying to make it last. He would later write to his sister, "I thought we were fighting devils. Instead, they gave me chocolate, real chocolate, better than anything father brought home before the war." How do you fight someone like that? That night, Klaus lay on the hard ground of the temporary holding area. Other prisoners pressed close on either side. The chocolate was long gone, but the taste remained. So did the questions. They had been told America was starving. that the British blockade had strangled American supply lines, that Roosevelt's war machine was a propaganda facade, hiding a nation on the brink of collapse. Yet these soldiers, these supposed savages, carried chocolate. Not just for themselves, for their enemies too. Klaus whispered to the man beside him, a corporal named Friedrich. "Did you get chocolate?" Friedrich nodded in darkness. 2 bars. 2. The first soldier gave me one. Then another came by an hour later, saw I had nothing, gave me another. Said something about how we all deserved a good meal. Klaus said nothing. He stared up at stars so bright they seemed to mock everything he'd learned in Hitler Youth training camps. Somewhere in the distance, American soldiers laughed around a cooking fire. The smell of coffee drifted across the desert, impossibly rich, impossibly real. The propaganda began to dissolve that night, not all at once, not dramatically, but like chocolate melting on the tongue, slow and irreversible, leaving only sweetness behind. From North Africa, Klaus and 300 other prisoners were loaded onto transport ships bound for America. The crossing took 14 days. They traveled in the cargo hold of a converted freighter, cramped but not cruel, given blankets and water, fed twice daily. The food astounded them, not just the quantity, though that alone defied belief, but the quality. White bread, actual meat, not scraps or organ waste, canned fruit that tasted like summer, and chocolate, always chocolate. American sailors distributed Hershey bars like they were infinite, like the factories back home churned them out faster than anyone could eat them. Some prisoners hoarded their bars, wrapping them carefully in spare cloth, trying to preserve something precious. Others ate them immediately, unable to resist. Klaus did both. He saved 1 bar, keeping it in his jacket pocket, wrapped and re-wrapped obsessively. But when sailors offered more, he ate them slowly, methodically, trying to understand what this abundance meant. Johann Schmidt, a panzer commander from Munich, sat beside Klaus one evening as the ship cut through dark Atlantic waters. Johann was older, maybe 35, with scars across his hands and a distant look that never quite left his eyes. "My daughter loves chocolate," Johann said quietly. Loved it before rationing. He held a Hershey bar in his palm, turning it slowly. "In 41, I waited in line 6 hours to buy her 1 bar for Christmas. 1 bar cost half my monthly salary." He paused, unwrapped the American chocolate, broke it in half. Here they give it away, to prisoners, to enemies. Klaus took the offered half. "What does it mean?" "It means we were lied to." Johann's voice carried no anger, just exhaustion. "About everything." Other prisoners gathered nearby, drawn by conversation in their native tongue. Most were young, Klaus's age or barely older, farm boys and factory workers conscripted into service, told they were fighting for survival against a barbaric coalition. Now they sat in an American ship's hold, bellies full, eating chocolate that their own officers hadn't seen in years. Werner Koch, a radio operator from Hamburg, spoke up. His voice trembled slightly. "My brother died at Stalingrad last winter. They told us he froze to death defending civilization, that the Russians gave no quarter, took no prisoners, showed no mercy." He held up his chocolate bar. "The Americans give us this. Why?" No one answered immediately. Finally, Klaus said what they all thought. "Because they can." The simplicity of it hung in the air like truth too large to grasp. America wasn't starving, wasn't desperate, wasn't fighting for survival against impossible odds. America was so rich, so impossibly abundant, it could afford to be generous even to its enemies. The propaganda had painted America as decadent, weak, corrupted by excess and democracy. But if this was weakness, Klaus couldn't understand what strength looked like anymore. His own nation had stripped everything to the bone for the war machine, rationed chocolate into memory. Yet here was the enemy fighting a war across 2 oceans simultaneously, and still they had enough to share. By the time the ship reached Norfolk, Virginia, Klaus had eaten 7 more chocolate bars. Each one tasted like evidence. Each wrapper stamped with Hershey, Pennsylvania, felt like testimony to something larger than military might. They disembarked on a cool spring morning, May 1943. The air smelled different here. Green and wet, nothing like the desert. Trees lined the horizon, impossibly lush after months of sand. Klaus and the others were loaded onto trains, old passenger cars with worn velvet seats, windows that actually opened. As the train rolled west through Virginia and Tennessee, prisoners pressed against the windows, staring at a landscape that seemed plucked from fairy tales. Farmland stretched for miles, heavy with crops. Houses dotted the countryside, intact, undamaged, their windows full of light. Children played in yards. Women hung laundry on lines. Everything looked normal, peaceful, untouched. "Where are the bomb craters?" Werner whispered. "Where are the ruins?" There were none. The war hadn't reached American soil. While Europe tore itself apart, while cities burned and children starved, America grew corn and raised cattle and manufactured chocolate in factories that ran around the clock. The train stopped once in Tennessee for supplies. American guards allowed prisoners to step onto the platform, stretch their legs under watchful eyes. A vendor sold candy from a cart nearby, calling out prices to soldiers and civilians. Klaus watched in amazement as children approached the cart, clutching coins, buying chocolate bars casually as breathing. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, bought 3 bars. 3. She unwrapped one immediately, took a bite, threw the wrapper on the ground without thinking. Klaus stared at that discarded wrapper like it was evidence of a crime he couldn't name. In Germany, children licked wrappers clean, scraped every molecule of chocolate residue, saved the paper for later use. Here, abundance made waste invisible. That evening, as the train continued west, Klaus wrote a letter to his mother. He knew it would be censored, read by American officials before being sent overseas. He didn't care. Some truths demanded expression regardless of audience. "Mutti," he wrote in careful script, "I am well. The Americans treat us fairly. They give us food and medicine. Yesterday, a soldier gave me chocolate. Real chocolate, Mutti. Better than anything from before. They give it to everyone, even us, even their enemies. I don't understand this war anymore. I don't understand what we were told. Please tell Father I am alive and thinking of home. Your son, Klaus." He folded the letter carefully, gave it to a guard who promised to process it. Then Klaus ate another piece of chocolate and watched America roll past his window like a dream that refused to end. They arrived at Camp Hearn 3 days later. Texas hit them like a wall of heat. Even in late spring, the temperature climbed into the 90s, the sun blazing across a sky so wide it felt endless. The camp sprawled across flat ranch land near the town of Hearn, wooden barracks arranged in precise rows, guard towers at the corners, wire fences that looked almost decorative compared to what they'd expected. Klaus stepped off the train and immediately heard music. American music, jazz spilling from a radio somewhere, bright and alien and surprisingly cheerful. Guards processed them efficiently but without cruelty, checking names against lists, assigning barracks, explaining rules in broken German or through interpreters. The camp commander, Colonel Davies, addressed them that first evening. He was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a lined face that suggested experience rather than age. He spoke through an interpreter, a German-American sergeant named Hoffman, who translated with perfect fluency. "Gentlemen," Davies began, his voice carrying across the assembled prisoners, "you are now under American military authority. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. You will work, as is permitted under international law, but you will be paid for your labor. You will receive adequate food, medical care, and living conditions. You will not be abused or mistreated. In return, we expect respect and cooperation." He paused, let Hoffman finish translating. "I know what you've been told about America, about us. I know the propaganda, but you'll have a chance now to see the truth for yourselves. This is Texas. This is America. You're going to work on local farms and ranches, help with the harvest, tend livestock. You'll work alongside American civilians. You'll see how we live." Davies's expression softened slightly. Some of you may find this experience changes your perspective. That's your choice. We won't force any ideology on you. Just work hard, follow the rules, and we'll all get through this war together. That night, Klaus lay in his bunk in Barracks 12, listening to dozens of men breathe and shift in darkness. The bunks were clean, the mattresses stuffed with real cotton, not straw. Blankets smelled of soap. Through the window, stars blazed impossibly bright in the Texas sky. Tomorrow they would begin work assignments. Tomorrow they would meet American civilians, see American homes, experience American life firsthand. Klaus felt something strange stirring in his chest. Not quite hope, not quite fear, something in between, uncertain and electric. He reached into his jacket pocket, found the chocolate bar he'd been saving since the ship. The wrapper was creased and worn now, but the chocolate inside remained intact. Klaus unwrapped it slowly in the darkness, broke off a single square, let it melt on his tongue. The sweetness felt like a promise he didn't yet understand. Work began at dawn. Klaus and 40 other prisoners were loaded into trucks and driven to local farms that had contracted for POW labor. The war had drained rural Texas of young men, leaving farms understaffed, crops in danger of rotting unharvested. The POW program provided a solution that benefited everyone. Farmers got workers, prisoners got wages and relative freedom. The military maintained control. Klaus was assigned to the Morrison Ranch, 2,000 acres of cattle land and wheat fields 20 miles from camp. The ranch owner, Jack Morrison, was in his 60s, weathered and lean, with hands like leather and eyes that missed nothing. He greeted the German workers with a nod, no ceremony, just practical assessment. "You folks will be helping with the cattle," Morrison said through the interpreter. "Feeding, cleaning, mending fences, some riding if you're up for it. Work's hard but fair. You do right by me, I'll do right by you." Klaus had never worked cattle before. He'd grown up in Stuttgart, a city boy through and through. But the physical labor felt good after months of captivity and transport. The ranch hands, local Texans too old or too young for military service, taught him the basics with surprising patience. By midday, the heat was unbearable. Klaus worked alongside an older ranch hand named Roy, moving hay bales from the barn to the feed stations. Sweat soaked through his shirt, dust coated his throat, muscles burned. Roy noticed him struggling, grinned, and pulled a canteen from his belt. "Drink up, son, can't have you passing out on me." Klaus drank deeply, the water cool and clean. He handed the canteen back, mumbled thanks in broken English. Roy studied him for a moment. "You a soldier?" Klaus nodded. Am prisoner now." "Where you from?" "Stuttgart, Germany." Roy wiped sweat from his brow, squinted at the horizon. "My boy's over there, in France, fighting Germans." He said it matter-of-factly, no accusation in his tone. "I expect he's about your age." Klaus didn't know how to respond to that. The absurdity of the situation hit him fully for the first time. Here he stood, enemy of America, working on an American ranch, drinking water from the canteen of a man whose son was possibly trying to kill Klaus's former comrades. Roy seemed to sense his confusion. He chuckled, shook his head. "War's a strange business. Don't make much sense when you're in the middle of it." He pulled something from his pocket, tossed it to Klaus. "A Hershey bar. Lunch break in an hour. You'll want that for energy." Klaus caught it automatically, stared at the familiar brown wrapper. "You give chocolate to enemy? Hell, son, you ain't my enemy. You're just a kid who got caught up in something bigger than yourself." Roy turned back to the hay bales. "Now quit gawking and grab that other side. These bales won't move themselves." They worked together in silence after that, but something had shifted. Not friendship exactly. More like mutual recognition. Two men doing hard work under a brutal sun, nationality irrelevant in the face of physical necessity. At noon, Morrison's wife appeared with lunch. She was a small woman, maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back and an expression of practiced kindness. She'd loaded a truck bed with sandwiches, lemonade, and more chocolate bars, driving out to the work crews like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Y'all need to eat," she announced, her Texas drawl thick and musical. "Can't work on empty stomachs." The sandwiches were thick slabs of ham and cheese on fresh bread. Nothing fancy but impossibly generous, given what Klaus knew of rationing back home. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, watching Mrs. Morrison distribute food to Germans and Americans alike without distinction. When she handed Klaus his chocolate bar, she smiled. "My son loved these. Used to eat 3 a day if I let him." Her expression clouded slightly. "He's in the Pacific now, fighting Japanese. I send him care packages when I can, fill them with chocolate and socks." She looked directly at Klaus. "I figure if someone's boy is far from home, scared and tired, he deserves something sweet. Doesn't matter which side he's on." Klaus felt his throat tighten. He managed to say thank you in English, the words clumsy on his tongue. Mrs. Morrison patted his shoulder, then moved on to the next worker. That evening, riding back to camp in the truck bed, Klaus ate his chocolate slowly and watched the Texas sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. Other prisoners talked quietly around him, comparing experiences, sharing stories from their various work assignments. Werner had worked at a dairy farm. "The owner's daughter gave us fresh milk," he said, voice full of wonder. "Cold from the icebox. And cookies. Homemade cookies with chocolate chips in them." Hans had been at a grain elevator. The foreman paid us in American money at the end of the day, real money, dollars. Then he took us to a store and let us buy things, cigarettes, soap, more chocolate. He laughed, a sound rusty with disuse. "I bought 5 chocolate bars, 5. Sent 3 home to my family if the mail gets through." Friedrich, the corporal Klaus had met in North Africa, had spent the day repairing tractors at a machinery shop. "The mechanic taught me about American engines," he said quietly. "Showed me the differences between their designs and ours. Treated me like an apprentice, not an enemy. At lunch, his wife brought us food, hot food and chocolate milk. Real chocolate milk in glass bottles." Klaus listened to these stories and understood something fundamental was happening. Not just to him, to all of them. Every interaction with American civilians, every casual act of generosity, every chocolate bar shared without thought, was dismantling the propaganda framework brick by brick. They had been told Americans were weak, soft, corrupted by comfort and democracy, but the people Klaus met were neither weak nor soft. They were simply prosperous enough to be kind, secure enough to be generous, powerful enough to treat their enemies with dignity. That night, lying in his bunk, Klaus wrote another letter to his mother. This time, he knew exactly what to say. "Moody, today I worked on a ranch. Real American cowboys, just like in the movies. They gave me chocolate again, and food, and water. They treated me like a person, not a prisoner. The ranch owner's son is fighting in France, against our army, but his father still gave me chocolate and fair wages. I am beginning to understand that we were lied to about many things. America is not what they told us. Americans are not what they told us. I am safe here. I am learning things I wish I had known before. Please tell Father I am well. Your son, Klaus." He folded the letter, placed it with the others to be censored and mailed. Then he ate one more square of chocolate and fell asleep to the sound of distant jazz music drifting from the guard barracks, strange and beautiful in the Texas night. Summer arrived with crushing heat. Klaus had been at Camp Hearn for 3 months now, working 5 days a week at Morrison Ranch, earning 80 cents per day, more money than he'd seen in years. He'd bought soap, writing paper, cigarettes to trade, and more chocolate than seemed reasonable. He sent bars home to Stuttgart whenever mail service allowed, hoping they reached his family, hoping his mother and father could taste what he was experiencing. The work was hard but satisfying. Klaus had learned to ride horses, mend fences, brand cattle. His German accent softened slightly, picking up English phrases from the ranch hands. "Howdy" became natural. "Much obliged" rolled off his tongue without thought. He was still a prisoner, still technically an enemy, but the lines blurred with every passing day. Other prisoners experienced similar transformations. The camp now held nearly 2,000 German POWs, all working throughout the region, all encountering American life in its most basic form. Some remained resistant, clinging to Nazi ideology even as evidence mounted against it. But most, especially the younger ones, couldn't ignore what they saw and tasted and lived. In July, the camp chaplain, Father Murphy, started offering English classes in the evenings. Klaus attended, hungry to understand the language more fully, to communicate without interpreters. The classroom was just a converted barracks, but Father Murphy taught with enthusiasm, using American products as learning tools. He held up a Hershey bar during one lesson. "This is chocolate," he said slowly, clearly. "Can you say it?" "Chocolate." The German prisoners repeated the word, their accents heavy but earnest. "Chocolate." Father Murphy smiled. "Close enough. Now, chocolate in America represents something important. We make enough chocolate that we can give it to our soldiers, to our children, to our allies, even to our prisoners. It's a symbol of abundance, of generosity, of a nation that can fight a war and still maintain prosperity at home." He broke the bar into pieces, distributed them to the students. "In your country, chocolate is rare now, yes? Rationed?" Klaus nodded along with others. "Here, we have chocolate factories running day and night. Hershey, Pennsylvania. They produce millions of bars every month. Some go to troops overseas, some go to the home front, some go to POW camps like this one." Father Murphy paused, his expression serious. "I tell you this not to boast, but to illustrate a point. America's strength isn't just military might. It's our capacity to produce, to sustain, to provide. We can fight a war without our people starving, without our children forgetting what chocolate tastes like." The lesson continued, but Klaus couldn't stop thinking about those words. Capacity to provide. His own nation had drained itself to bone for the war machine, stripped everything to bare survival, told its people that sacrifice was victory. Yet here was America, fighting on two fronts, and still they had chocolate for everyone. That weekend, Morrison invited Klaus and 2 other German workers to a ranch barbecue. It was Independence Day, July 4th, and the Morrison family was celebrating with friends and neighbors. Klaus hesitated, unsure if it was appropriate for a prisoner to attend an American patriotic celebration. But Morrison insisted, and the guards gave permission. The barbecue stunned Klaus with its abundance. Tables sagged under the weight of food. Beef brisket, pork ribs, potato salad, coleslaw, cornbread, beans, pies, cakes, and endless chocolate desserts. Chocolate cake, chocolate cookies, chocolate brownies, even chocolate ice cream kept cold in a hand-cranked freezer. It was a feast that would have fed his entire Stuttgart neighborhood for a week. American families mingled with German prisoners without apparent concern. Children played together, language barriers meaning nothing in the universal grammar of tag and hide and seek. Women served food with easy smiles. Men talked about crops and weather and the war, careful to avoid topics that might cause tension. Klaus stood near the dessert table, plate full, watching this scene like an anthropological study. A young American woman approached him, maybe 25, with blonde hair and a friendly expression. "You're one of the German workers, aren't you?" she asked. Klaus nodded. "Yes, miss. I am Klaus from Stuttgart." "I'm Sarah. Jack Morrison is my uncle." She gestured to the food. "Pretty different from Germany right now, I imagine." "Very different," Klaus admitted. "We do not have this abundance." Sarah's expression softened. "My husband is in Europe. Army Air Corps. He's been gone 18 months. She pulled a photograph from her purse, showed Klaus a young man in uniform. "He writes me every week when he can. Says he carries chocolate bars everywhere. Gives them to children in the towns they liberate." Klaus studied the photograph. The man looked kind, open-faced, exactly the type of soldier Klaus had expected to hate. Instead, he felt only sadness that this war had separated Sarah from someone she clearly loved. "I hope he comes home safe," Klaus said quietly. "Thank you." Sarah tucked the photo away. "You know, before the war, I taught German in high school. Loved the language, the literature. Goethe, Schiller, Hesse. I never imagined we'd be fighting Germany." She paused. "But I also never imagined we'd have German boys working on my uncle's ranch, eating barbecue on the 4th of July. She handed Klaus a slice of chocolate cake. War's strange. Makes enemies out of friends and friends out of enemies. But chocolate's chocolate, no matter what side you're on. Klaus took the cake, tasted it, closed his eyes briefly at the richness. When he opened them, Sarah had moved on to talk with other guests, leaving him holding a plate of American celebration and German contemplation. Later, as fireworks burst overhead, illegal and spectacular and completely American, Klaus stood with Friedrich and Werner, watching colors explode across the Texas sky. "We're losing the war," Friedrich said quietly. It wasn't a question. Werner nodded. "Have been for a while, probably." Klaus thought about everything he'd experienced in these months. The chocolate in North Africa, the food on the ship, the abundance at Camp Hearn, the generosity of the Morrisons and the other ranchers, the capacity of a nation to fight a global war and still celebrate with fireworks and cake. "We've already lost," Klaus said. "Maybe not the battles yet, but the war itself. You can't defeat this." He gestured to the barbecue, the families, the endless food, the casual wealth. "You can't conquer a nation that can afford to be generous to its enemies." No one argued. They ate their chocolate cake and watched the fireworks and felt the propaganda of their youth dissolve like sugar on the tongue, sweet and irreversible and complete. By September 1943, Klaus had written 23 letters to his mother. Some made it through the military censors and the chaos of international mail during wartime. Others disappeared into the void of war, lost or destroyed, or simply delayed indefinitely. But Klaus kept writing, compelled by a need to document what he was experiencing, to preserve testimony against the lies they'd been told. His mother's replies, when they came, were heartbreaking in their brevity and carefully coded language. The censors worked both directions, and she couldn't be explicit about conditions in Germany. But Klaus read between the lines. Food was scarce. Bombing raids increased. His father had been reassigned to factory work. His sister helped with rationing cards. Chocolate was a memory. In his letters, Klaus tried to explain Texas without sounding like propaganda himself. He described the Morrison Ranch, the work, the food, the people. He mentioned chocolate in every letter, a recurring motif that he hoped illustrated the gulf between what they'd been promised and what actually existed. "Mutti," he wrote in late September, "today Mrs. Morrison gave us homemade chocolate fudge. Real sugar, real cream, real chocolate. She made it just because it was Friday and she thought we might enjoy something special. I ate 3 pieces and saved 2 to share with Werner and Friedrich. I tried to explain to her that in Germany, chocolate like this would be reserved for high officials or special occasions. She laughed and said she makes fudge every month, more often if she has time. She asked if I wanted the recipe to send home to you. I said yes, though I don't know if you'll be able to get the ingredients. Just having the recipe feels like hope for after the war." Other prisoners wrote similar letters. Hans sent chocolate bars home to Dresden, along with descriptions of American dairy farms that seemed like fiction. Werner wrote to his wife about the grocery stores in Hearn, Texas, where civilians could buy chocolate whenever they wanted, no ration cards required. Friedrich described the camp library stocked with books and magazines, including German literature that had been banned in Berlin. The letters collectively became a secret weapon more powerful than any bomb. When they reached Germany, when families shared them with neighbors, when word spread about American treatment of prisoners, the propaganda machine faced its first serious challenge, not from enemy broadcasts or dropped leaflets, from the testimony of German soldiers themselves. The Nazi government tried to suppress this information, labeled it Allied manipulation, insisted the prisoners were being forced to write lies. But too many letters said the same things. Too many chocolate bars arrived in care packages, real and tangible, and impossible to dismiss as fabrication. Klaus's mother wrote back in October, "Your letters are miracles. Your father doesn't believe them at first, thinks you've been coerced. But I recognize your handwriting, your voice. The chocolate you sent reached us last month. We shared it with the Müllers and the Schoenfelds. Everyone cried. It's been so long since anyone tasted real chocolate." Frau Müller said it was proof that somewhere in this terrible world, abundance still exists. Your sister asks if America is really as you describe it. I tell her, yes, I believe you. War has made you honest in ways peace never required. Stay safe, my son. Come home when you can. Your loving Mutti. Klaus read that letter a dozen times, memorizing every word. Then he ate a piece of chocolate and wrote another letter, this one to his sister directly. Dear Greta, he began, I am sending you chocolate from a place called Pennsylvania. It comes from a factory that makes millions of bars every year. In America, even children have as much chocolate as they want. At first, I thought this was weakness, decadence, the corruption we were taught about. But now I understand it differently. A nation that can afford to give chocolate to its enemies while fighting a war across 2 oceans is not weak. It's more powerful than we ever imagined. When you eat this chocolate, remember that somewhere in the world, there is enough. Enough food, enough resources, enough kindness to spare for people who were supposed to be monsters. Remember that, and think about what we were told versus what is true. Your brother, Klaus. He sent the letter with 3 chocolate bars wrapped carefully in wax paper. He would never know if it reached her. The mail system grew more chaotic as Allied bombing intensified. But he sent it anyway, faith in communication stronger than evidence. December 1943 arrived cold and clear. Texas winter was mild compared to German standards, but the prisoners felt it after months of relentless heat. Camp Hearn decorated for Christmas, American style, with wreaths and tinsel and a large tree in the mess hall. Colonel Davies announced a special Christmas dinner, inviting local civilians to join, creating a celebration that blurred every line between prisoner and community. Klaus had been at camp 7 months now. 7 months of work and chocolate and slow transformation. He'd gained weight, his cheeks no longer hollow, his frame filled out with regular meals. He spoke English well enough to joke with ranch hands. He'd started reading American newspapers, understanding the war from a different perspective. The Christmas dinner preparations began days in advance. Camp cooks worked alongside German prisoners who'd been professional chefs before the war, combining American abundance with German technique. The menu was extraordinary: roasted turkey, ham glazed with honey, mashed potatoes, green beans, rolls, pies, and an entire table dedicated to chocolate desserts. Morrison and his family attended, along with dozens of other ranchers and townspeople who'd employed POW labor throughout the year. Sarah brought her mother and younger brother. Roy came with his wife. Even the mayor of Hearn attended, giving a short speech about unity and peace and hope for the war's end. But the centerpiece of the celebration was chocolate. Someone had arranged for a massive delivery from Hershey's, enough bars to give every prisoner 5 each, plus ingredients for baking. The result was a chocolate feast that seemed almost obscene in its abundance. Chocolate cake, chocolate cookies, chocolate pudding, chocolate fudge, chocolate-covered pretzels, even chocolate fondue with strawberries and bread for dipping. Klaus stood in the mess hall before dinner, staring at the dessert table like it was a museum exhibit. Other prisoners gathered around him equally stunned. Some laughed, some cried. Werner just shook his head slowly, unable to form words. Friedrich spoke what they all thought. My children haven't seen this much chocolate in 3 years combined. Maybe never, even before the war. He picked up a chocolate cookie, turned it over in his hands. How do you fight a nation that can do this while fighting you? Father Murphy appeared beside them, his priest's collar slightly crooked, his expression both amused and sympathetic. You don't, he said simply. That's the point. America's greatest weapon isn't our military, it's our capacity. We can fight a war and still celebrate Christmas with chocolate. We can capture enemies and treat them like guests. Because we have enough. Enough for everyone. The dinner began with prayer. Father Murphy led it, speaking in English first, then having a German-speaking prisoner translate. He prayed for peace, for soldiers on both sides, for families separated by war, for understanding between enemies. Then he prayed specifically for chocolate, and laughter rippled through the hall, breaking tension. Lord, he said with a smile, we thank you for this abundance, for the sweetness of chocolate in a bitter world, for the reminder that even in war, kindness is possible. for the hope that someday soon, all people everywhere will have enough to share. Amen. The meal was glorious. Klaus sat between Morrison and Roy, eating until his stomach hurt, tasting America in every bite. The turkey was tender, the ham perfect, the desserts beyond description. But it wasn't just the food, it was the atmosphere. Germans and Americans eating together, laughing together, sharing stories and chocolate and hope for peace. Sarah sat across from Klaus, her brother beside her. The boy was 15, too young for military service, full of questions about Germany that Klaus answered honestly. No propaganda, no posturing, just truth. Is Germany really destroyed? The boy asked. The newsreels make it look awful. Klaus nodded slowly. Much of it, yes. Cities bombed, people hungry, everything rationed. He gestured to the chocolate cake on his plate. This much chocolate could feed my neighborhood for a month. Do you hate us for it? Sarah asked quietly. For having so much while your country suffers? No, he said finally. I don't hate you. I think maybe I hate the people who lied to me, who told me you were monsters when you're just people. People with enough to share, even with enemies. He took a bite of chocolate cake, let the sweetness fill his mouth. This chocolate has taught me more about winning and losing than any battle I fought. After dinner, the camp band played Christmas carols. German prisoners and American civilians sang together, music transcending language. Someone produced more chocolate, because there was always more chocolate, and people ate and talked and forgot for a few hours that they were supposed to be enemies. Klaus stood outside later, needing air, needing space to process what he'd experienced. The night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead. He heard footsteps, turned to find Morrison approaching. Hell of a night, the rancher said, offering Klaus a cigarette. Klaus took it, let Morrison light it. They smoked in comfortable silence for a moment. You changed, son, Morrison said eventually. First day you got here you looked scared, angry. Now you look like you belong. Klaus considered that. Maybe I do, maybe that's the problem. Ain't no problem in finding humanity where you least expect it. Morrison flicked ash from his cigarette. War's gonna end eventually. Germany's gonna lose, no point pretending otherwise. Question is, what kind of men will Germany have when it's over? Men who learned hate and nothing else? Or men who learned that enemies can become friends, given chocolate and time? Klaus said nothing, but he understood. You keep writing those letters, Morrison continued. You keep telling folks back home what you've seen here. Maybe it won't change the war, but it might change what comes after, and that matters more than most people realize. They finished their cigarettes in silence, then returned to the warmth of the mess hall where chocolate and Christmas music and impossible friendship waited in the Texas night. Klaus Becker returned to Germany in June 1946, 1 year after the war ended. Europe was rubble and starvation. Stuttgart lay in ruins, his family's apartment building reduced to shell-marked walls. But his mother and sister had survived, living in a basement room, subsisting on Allied rations. His father had died in the war's final months, one of millions of casualties in a conflict that should never have been fought. Klaus came home with a duffel bag full of American chocolate. He'd saved his wages, bought bars whenever possible, hoarded them through the last months of captivity and the slow process of repatriation. 43 chocolate bars made it home with him, wrapped carefully, preserved like treasure. He gave them to his mother first. She held the Hershey bar like it was made of gold, tears streaming down her face, remembering the letters Klaus had sent, the impossible stories of abundance. She unwrapped it slowly, broke off a piece, placed it on her tongue, and closed her eyes. It's real, she whispered. You told the truth. They sat together that evening, Klaus and his mother and sister eating chocolate and talking about Texas, about Morrison Ranch and Father Murphy and the Christmas feast, about Roy and Sarah and all the Americans who'd treated him with dignity when hatred would have been easier. They gave you chocolate when you were enemies, his mother said. What does that mean? Klaus thought about North Africa, about the American soldier tossing him that first bar, about 7 months of transformation, propaganda dissolving like sugar on his tongue. "It means we lost more than the war," he said quietly. "We lost the moral argument. You can't call someone barbaric when they give you chocolate. You can't claim superiority when they treat prisoners better than your own government treats citizens." He broke off another piece of chocolate, savored the familiar taste. This chocolate defeated Nazism more completely than any bomb, because it proved we were lied to about everything. His sister, now 19, ate her own piece slowly. "Will there be more?" she asked. "After Reconstruction? Will we have chocolate again?" "Yes," Klaus said with certainty. "America's helping rebuild. The Marshall Plan, they call it. Food, money, resources. They're giving their former enemies chocolate again. Because that's what they do. They win wars by being generous." Over the following months, Klaus shared his chocolate with neighbors, with friends, with strangers who'd forgotten what sweetness tasted like. Each bar came with stories about Texas, about American ranches, about a nation powerful enough to be kind. He found work as a translator for the American occupation forces, his English fluent from Texas months. He helped process aid shipments, distribute rations, coordinate reconstruction. And he always included chocolate in the packages when possible. Other former POWs returned with similar stories. Hans from Dresden, Werner from Hamburg, Friedrich the Corporal. They'd all experienced the same transformation, all been changed by chocolate and kindness. Together, they formed an informal network, spreading testimony about what they'd seen, challenging the Nazi narrative that still lingered in some minds. In 1949, Klaus received a letter from Texas. Morrison had written, his handwriting shaky with age, asking how Klaus was doing, if he'd found his family, if he needed anything. The letter included a care package, a dozen Hershey bars, some American magazines, and a photograph of Morrison Ranch taken that spring. Klaus cried reading that letter, not from sadness but from recognition that some bonds transcended war. That chocolate shared between enemy and rancher created connections that peace made permanent. He wrote back immediately, describing Germany's slow recovery, the Allied aid, the chocolate factories being rebuilt. He thanked Morrison for everything, for teaching him about generosity, for showing him that enemies could become friends. "The chocolate you gave me in 1943 changed my life," Klaus wrote. "Not because it fed my body, though it did that too, but because it fed my understanding. It proved that humanity doesn't have to be a casualty of war, that even in darkness, sweetness is possible. I will never forget the taste of American chocolate or the lesson it taught. Your friend always, Klaus." He never received a reply. Morrison died that autumn, peacefully in his sleep, but Sarah wrote to Klaus telling him about her uncle's last days, how he'd talked about the German prisoners who'd worked his ranch, how he'd believed that chocolate and honest work could heal wounds deeper than war. Klaus kept that correspondence for the rest of his life. He married in 1951, had 3 children, worked as a teacher, never forgot Texas. He told his students about the war, about propaganda, about how chocolate had defeated ideology. He kept a Hershey bar in his desk drawer always, wrapped and rewrapped, a permanent reminder of the day he'd knelt in North African sand and tasted something impossible. His children grew up hearing stories about cowboy ranchers and American abundance and chocolate that taught more than any textbook. They learned that enemies were just people on the other side of lies. That kindness was strength, not weakness. That a nation powerful enough to give chocolate to prisoners was a nation worth understanding. In 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell, Klaus was 75 years old. He stood in the crowd in Berlin, watching Germans from east and west embrace, watching the concrete barrier crumble, watching peace emerge from decades of Cold War tension. Someone handed out chocolate bars to celebrate, Hershey bars brought by American tourists. Klaus took one, unwrapped it slowly, let the familiar taste fill his mouth one more time. The sweetness was exactly as he remembered from North Africa, from the ship, from Texas, from his mother's basement in 1946. Proof that some things remained constant even as everything else changed. He thought about the American soldier who'd tossed him that first bar in 1943, about Morrison and Roy and Sarah and Father Murphy, about all the people who'd taught him that chocolate was never just chocolate. It was abundance, generosity, hope, the capacity to be kind even to enemies. Klaus ate that chocolate bar standing in freed Berlin, tasting America and Texas and transformation, grateful for every sweet lesson the war had taught him about winning and losing and the unexpected flavor of peace.